The crack of the chainsaw cut through the quiet morning like a gunshot, and that's when I knew something was very wrong. I dropped my coffee, rushed to the window, and froze as I saw my neighbor, our neighborhood's self-appointed HOA queen, standing in my backyard. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, yelling into her phone, and sawing directly into the trunk of my 30-year-old oak tree. Not trimming it, not marking it, cutting it down, on my property, without permission. My heart pounded as I ran outside, shouting for her to stop, but the chainsaw drowned out my voice. She didn't even look at me. She just smirked, pushed harder, and kept cutting like she owned the place. I lived in this house for 8 years, long before she moved in with her shiny rules, clipboard attitude, and that ridiculous red convertible she treated like royalty. That oak tree wasn't just shade. It was history. It cooled my house, sheltered birds, and stood exactly where the property survey said it belonged. Fully mine. But to her, it was non-compliant landscaping. That's what she screamed when I finally got close enough for her to hear me. She said the HOA demanded removal because it blocked sightlines and dropped leaves. I told her she had no authority, no written notice, and no right. She laughed and said, "Sue me." That's when I noticed where the tree was leaning. Every cut she made shifted its weight closer to her driveway. Closer to that spotless, cherry-red convertible she bragged about every chance she got. I warned her, loudly, repeatedly. I told her to stop before someone got hurt or something got destroyed. She rolled her eyes, revved the chainsaw one last time, and stepped back in triumph. The oak groaned like it was alive, the ground trembled, and then in slow, terrifying silence, the tree began to fall. Not toward my house, not toward the fence, straight toward her car. Her smile vanished, the chainsaw dropped, and in that frozen second, I realized this wasn't just about a tree anymore. The sound of crushing metal echoed through the neighborhood like an explosion. The oak came down hard, branches snapping, leaves flying, the thick trunk slamming directly across the hood of her convertible. Glass shattered. The windshield caved inward. The roof buckled like a soda can. For a split second, everything went dead silent. Then she screamed. Not a normal scream. This was pure rage and disbelief mixed together, loud enough to bring neighbors running from every direction. She rushed toward the car, hands shaking, yelling that I'd set her up and that this was somehow my fault. I stood there in shock, heart racing, replaying the moment over and over. I hadn't touched the saw. I had warned her, multiple times. But logic didn't matter to her. She pointed at me, face red, mascara already running, and accused me of sabotaging the cut. She said I pushed the tree, that I distracted her on purpose, that I'd planned the whole thing just to damage her property. I told her calmly that she was on my land, cutting my tree, without permission. That only made things worse. She pulled out her phone and dialed 911 with dramatic flair, pacing around the wreckage like a courtroom lawyer. She loudly told the dispatcher that her neighbor had attacked her vehicle, and that she feared for her safety. She made sure everyone listening could hear how expensive the car was, how important she was, how irresponsible I supposedly was. Neighbors gathered in clusters, whispering, some filming, others shaking their heads. A few of them had warned me about her before, about the complaints, the fines, the threats. But I never imagined it would end like this. While we waited for the police, she switched strategies. She started crying, full-on sobbing, talking about how hard she worked, how the HOA trusted her, how this car was her pride and joy. Then just as fast, the tears stopped and the insults started again. She demanded I pay for everything. Tow truck, repairs, emotional distress. She even said the HOA would fine me daily until I fixed the mess. I reminded her that the mess was her doing. She laughed and said, "We'll see what the cops say." When the police cars finally pulled up, lights flashing, she straightened her posture, wiped her face, and put on the most innocent expression I'd ever seen. She was ready to tell her version of the story. The officers stepped out of their cruisers and immediately separated us, which didn't stop her from trying to talk over everyone. She rushed toward them first, waving her arms and pointing dramatically at the fallen tree and her crushed convertible. She spoke fast and loud, claiming I had harassed her, distracted her, and caused the accident out of spite. She even said I'd refused to cooperate with the HOA for months and that this was the final straw. One officer held up a hand, calmly telling her to slow down and start from the beginning. She sighed heavily, as if the world had burdened her unfairly, and launched into a rehearsed speech. When it was my turn, I told the story exactly as it happened. I explained that she entered my backyard without permission, started cutting my tree, and ignored my warnings. I mentioned the property survey, the lack of written HOA notice, and the fact that I never touched the chainsaw. I could see her rolling her eyes behind the officers, whispering insults under her breath. One neighbor stepped forward and backed me up, saying they'd seen her cutting and heard me yelling for her to stop. Another neighbor added that she'd bragged before about taking care of the tree herself. Her confidence started to crack. One officer asked the question that changed everything. "Ma'am, do you have authorization to remove that tree?" She confidently said yes and claimed the HOA approved it. The officer asked for documentation. She froze. She said the paperwork was at home and that she didn't need it on hand. The officer nodded, then asked a follow-up. "And do you realize you were on private property?" She snapped back that HOA rules overrode property lines. That's when the officer gently corrected her. HOA rules didn't give her permission to trespass or destroy property. They walked over to the stump, examined the cut, and noted how the tree naturally leaned toward her driveway. One officer pointed out that gravity did exactly what gravity does. No sabotage, no pushing, just a bad decision followed by consequences. She tried to interrupt, but the officer shut it down, telling her to let them finish. Her face drained of color. The confidence she walked in with was gone, replaced by tight lips and shaking hands. Finally, the officer explained that because she cut down a tree on someone else's property without permission, she was liable for damages. Not just the car, but the tree itself. Her jaw dropped. She started shouting again, saying this was unfair and that the HOA would handle it. The officer calmly told her the HOA wasn't present, but the law was. That's when reality finally slammed into her harder than the tree had hit her car. The officer explained that mature trees have value, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, depending on age, size, and condition. This wasn't a sapling from a hardware store. It was a 30-year-old oak. She stared at the stump like it had personally betrayed her. Her voice wavered as she asked if they were joking. They weren't. One officer pulled out a small notebook and began writing everything down: trespassing, destruction of property, and potential civil liability. The words sounded foreign to her, like they belonged to someone else's story, not hers. She tried one last angle. She claimed the tree was dangerous, that it was dead, that it could have fallen on someone. The officer looked up at the branches, still full of green leaves, and raised an eyebrow. He asked if she was a certified arborist. She snapped back with sarcasm, which didn't help her case. Meanwhile, more neighbors stepped forward. One mentioned how she'd complained about the leaves clogging her gutters. Another said she'd threatened to take matters into her own hands weeks earlier. Each comment tightened the situation around her like a net. A tow truck arrived to haul away what was left of her convertible. The driver whistled low when he saw the damage. She demanded he be careful, as if that still mattered. As the car was lifted, bits of glass rained onto the pavement. She watched silently, arms crossed, jaw clenched, the reality of the repair bill sinking in. I felt no joy watching it happen, just exhaustion. I'd wanted the tree to stay. I'd wanted peace. Instead, we were standing in the aftermath of her arrogance. Before leaving, the officers gave her clear instructions. Any further contact with me needed to go through proper legal channels. No retaliation, no fines, no HOA enforcement. They advised me to get a certified arborist to assess the tree's value and suggested documenting everything. She scoffed at that, muttering that this wasn't over. The officer looked her straight in the eye and said, "For today, it is." As the cruisers drove away, the crowd slowly dispersed. She stood alone by the empty driveway, staring at the stump. For the first time since she moved in, she had nothing to say. I went inside, sat at my kitchen table, and finally let myself breathe. The oak was gone, but something else had fallen too. Her illusion of control. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. No letters taped to my door, no surprise fines, no passive-aggressive HOA emails copied to half the neighborhood. It was like she'd vanished. But beneath the silence, things were moving fast. I hired a certified arborist, just like the officer suggested. He walked the yard, measured the stump, examined old photos, and confirmed what I already knew. The oak was healthy, mature, and valuable. Very valuable. When the final report arrived, the number at the bottom made my stomach drop. It was more than her car was worth. Her lawyer reached out first. The tone was polite, careful, nothing like her. They wanted to resolve the matter amicably. That meant paying for the tree, the cleanup, and legal fees in exchange for avoiding court. I agreed, as long as it was all in writing. A week later, the settlement papers were signed. She never contacted me directly. Not once. According to a neighbor, she sold the convertible for parts and stopped attending HOA meetings altogether. Someone else mentioned she resigned from the board shortly after. No announcement, no explanation, just gone. Spring came, and with it, a strange sense of closure. I planted a new tree in the same spot. A young oak, smaller, but full of potential. As I pressed the soil around it, I realized something important. This wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries. She thought rules gave her power. She thought intimidation worked. But respect for property, and for people, still mattered. The law mattered. Neighbors started stopping by more often. Some apologized for not speaking up sooner. Others thanked me for standing my ground. Apparently, I wasn't the only one she'd tried to push around. Her absence changed the neighborhood. Meetings were calmer. Complaints dropped. People smiled more. One bad actor had created tension for years, and it took one reckless decision to bring it all crashing down. Every now and then, I glance at the driveway where her car used to sit. It's empty now. Quiet. Peaceful. The stump is gone too, replaced by fresh grass and that small oak reaching upward. It'll take time to grow. So will trust. But both are already rooted. I never wanted her car destroyed. I never wanted a showdown. All I wanted was for my tree to stand. She made her choice the moment she picked up that chainsaw. Gravity, law, and consequences did the rest.